Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Susan and I continue our conversation. Liam Knox in his excellent article on Stephen Bird's new book, Lifting the Veil, taking a look at enrollment management and answering the question, is it to blame for so many of the problems colleges are facing? Part 2 of 2. And Julie and I will take on scholarship displacement. As a listener sent in a question on that, we'll tackle what is scholarship displacement. And then we'll transition and we will have our final part of our interview with our homeschool experts, Dr. Michele, Evard, Ramsey, and Liam Knox, looking at how college admission offices evaluate homeschool applicants. And then we'll have part 2 of 3, Kevin Newton breaking down the London School of Economics, LSE. Friends, Susan and I continue our discussion about Stephen Bird's article with Liam Knox from Inside Higher Ed about his book, Pulling Back the Veil of Enrollment Management. Bird unloads with a diatribe. He is a fierce critic of how enrollment management has corrupted colleges. We hope you enjoy part 2 of this enlightening article.
What we also saw at this time during this decade mark were the admissions directors being fired. And I'm not going to say who it was, but I actually remember the first liberal arts college dean in the Northeast at a lovely school, well-known, who lost his job for no reason other than I think the institution didn't see him making the transition to a data-driven admission process.
So what are your thoughts, Susan? Do you see this as criticisms of this are just naivete, and at the end of the day, you have to bring in a certain amount of revenue or you can't run your school, and it's just kind of what you have to do? It might be unsavory, but it's what you have to do? Or do you feel like the line's being crossed and there's transgressions all over the place and it's corrupted higher ed?
I think this is a pretty extreme opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Stephen Burd is being controversial.
Yeah.
He's being very conservative about how he's interpreting a lot of this. I mean, college admissions is an industry like any other that has had to change with the times. It's had to use technology. It's had to go to predictive formulas. And a balanced budget matters much more now than the mom and pop shops of, 30 and 40 years ago. And, colleges, as you've said often, are businesses. And in order to deliver the quality products that it delivers to vast number of kids and a much more diverse student population, much more diverse.
I agree with that. Like, I definitely think he's got some valid points. Like, I think it is a travesty that someone said the purpose of financial aid is to figure out how to suck as much money as you can out of people. Like, I don't think that was the intention of financial aid. And I think that's part of a mentality there. But I agree with what you just said. Like, I think and I experienced this at Westtown, all that stuff that you said. We were still in the phase where marketing was a dirty word, enrollment management was a dirty word, and there was a lot of pushback from faculty on things.
Right.
And we would be upset. Like, do you realize, like, do you want a salary? Like there's things that you need to do to balance your budget. And I think you can't understand this without understanding, and he talks about it in the article, but it was a sea change in the Reagan era. Like, Reagan basically convinced a lot of people that higher ed was big government.
Right.
And it led to states saying, well, we're not going to fund it. We're going to give you a tax cut instead. And so I mentioned on Monday's podcast about the University of Connecticut initially having a $70 million budget shortfall. Well, what I didn't get into is the percentage of the budget for the University of Connecticut that came from state appropriations used to be over 50%, and now it's down to 19%.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And I've seen numbers for Virginia and some other states than Colorado that are much, much more stark than that. So if you're a school, and, this is one thing we haven't talked about. I had one person on the show, David Marcus, the author of the book Acceptance, and he made the case he said, I know, a lot of people can disagree with me, but he made the case that colleges aren't necessarily charging too much, because basically what he said was it's expensive to run a really good college. Like, if you're going to have, like, almost all the things that people want cost a lot of money. You want good faculty, you want career services, you want mental health support, you want academic advising, you want, nice places to live and be able to pay your teachers a living wage and not just rely on adjuncts, and you go on and on and on. And then, healthcare facility, like, it's expensive and it takes money. And so if you're going to have all that revenue stripped away because taxpayers no longer want to fund it, and I know there's a lot of competition for taxpayer dollars, you're talking about police and roads and bridges and
Sure.
K-12 and pension programs that are drying. I realize that, right? Like, something has to give. And so I just know there are a lot of really, really good people who really want to help students that feel the need to do some of the things that are caricatured as whatever, unethical or corrupting in this article, because they need to meet budgetary goals. And it can be really naive to think that the whole thing's just going to work out if you're not conscious of your NTR, your net tuition revenue, and who's actually going to pay for all of these things. Like, you can be well-intentioned and say you just want to help the poor, and education is designed to be, catapult people into a life of opportunity and transform a whole generation of students and a family line. And that sounds great and noble, but at the end of the day, somebody has to pay for it.
That's right. And, the cost of college didn't keep up with inflation for a century. And that was just the way it was. And I can remember the business VP at one point, back at Bates saying, well, the cost of going to college is around the same as a fully loaded mid-sized Chevrolet. And that was his whole perspective on what a year of college, should cost. So, okay, well, that was $8,000 for a long time. And then it was suddenly $70,000. And that's the change, the perception that higher ed should be cheap. It took a couple generations for that to change. But what I think we've lost is the middle class.
Sure.
And that continues to be what worries me. I mean,
it's both the middle class. It's the middle class, and what hits the middle class is going to hit the underclass and the lower class even harder, because the amount of debt they are taking out is such a high percentage of their budget. So it's hitting both the lower class, working class, and middle class.
Right. But the need-based financial aid, well, even though the very pricey, highly selective colleges have raised that threshold for what they consider to be people who are deserving of having their financial need met. It's the polarization is there. I mean, if a college gives need-based aid and is committed to meeting the full demonstrated need, then they are funding kind of a part of their student body that everybody else is helping to pay for. But the people in the middle then don't get a lot of financial aid, need-based aid. That's the group then that they have to do discounts for, right? So they start trying to lower the cost, not the highly endowed, big names that we all know and don't always love. But then that's where that discount becomes so big. And I didn't really understand discounting until it started hitting our students at West Ham, where full pay kids would come in and say, wow, I'm getting a $7,000 a year Dean's scholarship that I didn't even apply for. We're not even applying for financial aid. But they had figured out for a family with those resources exactly how much of a discount it would take to bring them in.
And that's part of the science that the quants do. They go look at that stuff. Now, here's a point that I think is valid. If you start out and you say, okay, our goal is to attract wealthy families. So wealthy families are used to certain types of amenities, so we need to give them the amenities.
Right. That's right.
And then all of a sudden you have to have a whole different types of dorms. You have different types of student centers. You have to do all that kind of stuff. And then people do like that. So then competitors are hearing, hey, your dorms aren't as good, or your food is not gourmet or whatever. And then people feel like we need to go raise multi-million-dollar campaigns to compete with that. Then you get into this race. I know when I went to college, I just had quarter-style traditional dorms. I didn't know anything any better than that, and it was fine. Now, that's completely anathema to most people. Like, you want either apartment-style, suite-style, all kinds of things, and you re-norm things. I mean, if you're going to give people the Ritz-Carlton and the Four Seasons, they're not going to want to go back to Motel 6. And and there is some truth to that's what's happened. And I think the motive for that is, okay, how can we appeal to people that will pay more? So then then I think that was a valid point, that's part of what's contributed to the financial problems. Yes. And also even the merit race. Like, I remember an article that was, I read from an Ohio admissions person who was the biggest regret of her career was she felt she played a role in the whole discounting that started in Ohio. And then now she said it's a wild, wild west, and I don't know how we get out of it. I don't know how we get off this train track, because you probably remember that, Susan, for a long time, like Denison held out, then Kenyon held out, then Oberlin, and then they all felt like they had to do it because they were just losing kids, because people were like, well, why should I go there when I can get 30,000 more over here?
Yeah, once it's a slippery slope once it starts.
Oh, yeah. And once that discount rate gets more and more and more and more and more, we know that's been growing. And by the way, friends, if you're not familiar with the term discount rate, it's just when you look at the percentage of sticker price that people actually pay. And so I remember, Susan, when that number was getting close to 50% for private schools. Now it's blown through that. And there's some schools that more than half of their prices being given away, and they feel like they have to do it because, I was having a conversation with the VP of Enrollment not too long ago, and he was like, if we want strong kids, we got to buy them. If we don't buy them, they don't come. They don't come. We're not going to win unless we buy them. And so now you've got that whole thing going, and it's really tricky, because I think both sides do have some valid points. And I can also relate to what you said. And I'm going to say this because I really feel confident that she wouldn't mind me saying this, but you remember Tamar. You worked closely with her. She said this is one of the things that drove her out of the business, out of this. It's like she experienced the change when it went from helping students and you felt like you were counseling and helping it, and then everything it was all about how much money can we squeeze out of you. And you're like, I lost interest in it, when I saw that. So I did admissions before that. I did it after it. It was night and day. It really, really changed. So
yeah, no, I think that's true.
I'm torn, because I definitely think you're naive to think schools don't need to get revenue, especially when all the other revenue sources are drying up. And then once you get into these races, and you inflate people's expectations, you really do create a dilemma. Because if you want amazing career services and amazing, academic advising and incredible dorms and top faculty and top advising, all this stuff comes with cost.
That's right.
So now you're
absolutely
driving your cost up. But then meantime, you enter into a merit race war. And if you're not giving away a huge percentage of your revenue, then you don't win kids. Then you do end up with a lot of scenarios that aren't necessarily good. One is potential closure or mergers, or you're cutting costs and, decreasing quality, or you're gapping kids and really making it, you're setting people up to have massive Parent Plus loans or massive student debt.
Yeah, which is hideous.
Yeah, which is hideous. And so I thought we'd agree. I think we both agree, like he has some good points. He probably went to an extreme to emphasize some things. I think the financial realities of colleges are real. He is right, though, that there's a whole underground, like this is largely under the surface. I don't think a lot of people know that there's data quants out there targeting wealthy families and figuring, you know what? This family can pay full, but we got to get $45,000 out of them. So let's figure out and study how much of a merit scholarship we need to give them to get them to come. That stuff is pretty hush-hush because part of the appeal of the merit scholarship is the cachet and the prestige of look what you got. Not necessarily, you don't want people to know that you were targeted because of your ability to pay $45,000.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so that stuff is all really, really under the table. So I don't know. What should our listeners take away from this?
Well, I think kids need to understand, and families too, what they're buying when they're looking. What do they really want their money to get them? And think long and hard about values and what you're going to be looking at on a college campus, and how do you pick schools that are going to be the very best fit for your child, and really move them to that next level of both the intellectual and personal growth, and prepare for whatever comes next, rather than looking at the superficial things that money can buy. Now, that's not to say that you don't want an attractive campus or a well-maintained campus, but if you go into a college search thinking about, think about what the colleges are spending their money on. Where's the real value? And who are they serving? And it's pretty easy to look at data about a college and figure out, what's the socioeconomic spectrum here? Is it basically a meet financial need operation? I just think it's good for families to know about this stuff so that they can go into their college research process with their eyes open and decide a little bit in advance what they're going to value, when they look. What
points did you think he had that were valid, Susan?
Well, I think that kind of the takeover of the data analytics, and the fact that that's playing such an enormous, we're seeing it in demonstrated interest. We're seeing it in publications and targeted marketing. And now we're seeing it in actually, the price you pay for college.
I was having a conversation with the VP of Enrollment not too long ago, 2024. And I said, you've worked for a lot of different places. How many of them did you feel pressure to improve the ranking of the college?
Ah.
And the VP of Enrollment, she says to me, every single one of them.
Every single one.
Every single one of them. They want those rankings moving up. So that's a part of this too, right? That's a part of what's come in with the pressure, is that type of pressure. That's seen as moving your institution forward. And then, well, that led to a lot of things for a long time. In fairness to U.S. News, I think it's gotten a little better because they have changed some of the metrics after massive blowback.
Right.
That they were using. right? So like when admit rate was in the formula, well, you got to drive your admit rate down. You got to recruit to reject if I'm going to get judged by admit rate.
That's right.
And for the longest time, there was nothing about diversity at all in there. So why value that at all?
Or social mobility, upward mobility.
Yep, social mobility. And now at least, and and please don't misinterpret this, listeners, because Susan and I are not a fan of these rankings. But
Not at all.
Not at all. But there's some things, okay, looking at retention, graduation rates, some things I feel in some cases, and I don't, now listen, I don't necessarily think they responded out of altruism or benevolence or goodwill. I think they just got such backlash.
Yeah.
In some cases, they were losing so much credibility. In some cases, competitors came and did things better. I think their hand was forced. I don't want to really give them credit I think their motive was just it was all about money. But so there's certainly that. That's not going to change though. So sometimes I feel like, why am I even wasting my breath railing against it? It's not going to go anywhere. It's still going to be out there. People are still going to use it. I'm just whistling at the wind,
Although I at least in my experience, Mark, I think families aren't really using, there are certain populations, yes, but I don't think families are using the rankings as religiously as they used to.
I completely agree.
Yeah, I think they're less a part of the conversation. Absolutely.
Well, I one of the reasons why I feel that's true is because there's a lot of them. And I think in some ways that's helped, because I think that's helped undermine the perception that there was some precision there.
Yep.
I love doing that. I had that in my book where I showed one school was 378 in this one and number 9 in this one and 71 in this one and 31 in this one. And it was like, and I have more and more families that say that, because, we actually have a question in our questionnaire, what roles do rankings play? And more often than not, people will say, those things can really be manipulated. I don't know if I trust them.
Well, and truthfully, I think the families that rely on them the most are when parents didn't go to college in this country.
Sure.
And they may be coming from countries and educational systems that are much more metric driven.
Yep.
Not
and that's
holistic.
Understandable too, because oftentimes those are countries that have more almost like caste systems, where if you don't get on the right path with certain things, your opportunities are limited. So why would you not think that way?
Absolutely.
Totally. But I find they just substitute acceptance rate for rankings now. They do look at it. They do look at acceptance rates, and they make a lot of decisions off of that. So there's still a pressure on colleges to recruit to reject.
Oh yeah, yeah, and they can give us all the excuses in the world for, and I hear what they say about, we have these students who would never have found us if it wasn't through, this kind of reckless recruitment tactics. And yeah, but again, it's like what we said earlier, is when something is so damaging, the little good that it affords is diminished.
There's another component of this that we haven't talked about, but when you use some strategies to bring more revenue into your coffers, you are potentially creating an opportunity to help other people that don't have as much revenue.
That's right.
Like especially if part of it is like, scholarships, of course, they're making the case of the money shifted from need-based to merit-based.
Right.
And it went in the opposite direction. And that's just such a tricky thing because, I'm such a big access person, but I also, on the other hand, think I really feel strongly that the student aid index, the EFC, it does take too much of people's discretionary money and expects it to go to college. So I have no problem with someone saying I need merit money. I'm very sympathetic to the family that says, this formula is saying that I can pay 60 and I feel like I can pay 25.
Right.
Especially when you really dive into all of the, I would say, inappropriate ways that number is calculated. I mean, like one example is, there's a provision in CSS profile to use what's called higher cost areas. So that's a choice that a school has.
Yes.
And not all schools do it because they don't have it in their budget. I'm sure most would love to do it if they could. But last time I talked with a financial aid guru, and I don't think it's changed, the biggest adjustment that they can make is 20%. So is it fair to compare like San Francisco or New York City to, a small place in Kansas or, pick your place. Oklahoma, really low cost of living, 20%. There's no way. And there's no way that formula is fair just on a cost of living factor alone. That's one of 15 or 20 ways I could rail against how that number, is calculated. So I'm very sympathetic to families that say I need the merit money to make this thing work.
Well, and the good thing about the merit money is that it has brought a lot of more colleges and universities into the conversation. It's easier to put great schools that are lesser known on a student's list because of their practice of strong merit funding, especially for middle income families.
Well, it certainly helped more middle income families afford college.
Right. And there are more families that are saying we're not going to be able to pay the sticker price. We're not going to get need-based financial aid, but we sure can't pay $80,000, $90,000 a year. So we're not going to look at those colleges. And I really appreciate that, is when
Sure.
that decision is made up front. It's like, here's how we're going to build our college list because we want to be able to afford this. And I totally respect that.
I do, but I also wonder, as the discount rate gets higher and higher and higher,
Yeah.
and college is under assault, and the demands from the public are more and more and more, hire more mental health counselors, give me better
that's
advising,
true.
give me a better student center, this food needs to improve, whatever, on and on and on and on down the list. I want to see more internships. Something kind of has to give.
Well, they can stop paying their football coaches $5 million a year.
But that's just a business decision. They're only doing that because they bring in 80.
They're generating all that revenue,
Yeah,
right?
that's
On
just a business.
ESPN.
Yeah. And even alumni gifts. I mean, that is such a difficult one because on face value, it feels so corrupt, but that's just a pure business decision. They're paying those people that money because they bring in way more.
Way more.
Way more. And even just off alumni contributions, a lot of that is booster money that wealthy alum that want to see their teams win cough up the money. But boy, something doesn't feel right about it.
I
Because
know.
you wonder, well, now with NIL, Susan, it's the players are getting it, which partly it feels more ethical because they're sacrificing their body and getting nothing a lot of times. But boy, some of the numbers, I mean, Bronny James, Shedeur Sanders, they got over $4 million as players
Gee.
in NIL deals. So that's a whole other subject that we probably should talk about at some point. But
We really should. I think that would be very interesting.
yeah, but I'm hoping this article at least got people thinking.
Yeah, well, and I hope that families who are interested in this will pick up The Price You Pay for College by Ron Lieber. I mean, if they really, I think Ron addresses a lot of these points, and I think he does it in a way that's highly critical of what's going on, but provides a lot of context, and I think really, really good advice. So for families who are scared by this information, I mean, this is kind of creepy stuff, and it makes you worry financially and about all sorts of things. Get that book. Would you agree, Mark? Did you feel that that's a good source?
Yeah, and I think you probably heard when I had him on the podcast to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did his homework. He definitely did his homework. And there's some good works out there that are being done. I'm not trying to sound too promotional here, but I'm really excited about Salingo's book in 2025. I mean, that he's got coming out. That's because it's designed to identify value in ways other than a ranking without coming up with, he said he's going to name some names, but he's going to more underscore some people that are like unheralded gems, a little bit like not a college that changed lives, but look, here's some people doing it really, really well that are flying under the radar. And I think all that stuff helps chip away at rankings and chip away at the perception it's got to be a low admit rate school, and it's a challenge. And I think any bit that anybody can play, But yeah, Lieber's book did a good job of really having that money talk. It was very helpful to a lot of people. Yeah, I don't, the thing is, I kind of feel with this, the enrollment management, I almost feel like it's sort of cat's out the bag. It's kind of like you can't put the toothpaste back in the, in the tube when it spills. I don't want to sound like fatalist, but I don't really know how to walk back some of this stuff. And once again, I'm not saying that a lot of this stuff is bad, all of it, but one thing I don't like, Susan, the amount of money some of these people are paid is like the Noel Levitzes of the world, and some of the amount that they're paid, and that's a little unsavory. Like, it is just pure corporate America that way, right? Like, some people are paying. I mean, there's a lot of colleges. I remember talking to a college, and this college is struggling financially. And they told me that they pay more than 7 figures a year. So more than $1 million a year. And they kind of feel they need to do it. But some of the execs are getting paid a lot of money, but they've got the schools in a place where they feel like, if you're going to bring in another 10 million into our coffers, it's the same thing as the football coach.
Exactly. I was just
if I have
thinking
to pay you 1.5 million, but you bring in 10 million, that's a good business decision. So it feels broken, but for the most part, I am sympathetic. Like, I don't feel people that are doing a lot of these things we're talking about in here, I don't feel they're acting unethically. Like, a good example would be Angel Perez. He's the head of our organization, and Susan and I know him to be very ethical, honest guy. He did all this stuff when he was at Trinity. He felt he had to. He didn't have a choice.
Right.
He didn't like it. He talks about every year I pointed out to the board how many kids we were losing because we're not able to give more financial aid, and I presented reports. But I had to do this stuff because at the end of the day, I have a budget I have to make.
Right.
So I don't feel like enrollment management in and of itself is like unsavory and corrupt.
I agree.
I think a lot of what is done has to be done when you're not getting a lot of money from, government sources anymore. But that does not mean that it's not without its excesses. So, any closing thoughts?
No, I think that's a good kind of philosophical point on which to end. And, I think like many industries, this has been a slow evolution that suddenly gained a lot of momentum because it was working, and colleges started having to think of themselves as businesses, and it's, I think the making sure the colleges that are on your child's list are financially stable. And we've talked about that a lot on the podcast of how you can determine the financial solvency of a college that you're interested in. Because these are colleges, the ones that are struggling are ones that have been struggling for a long time.
But I'll tell you, Susan, increasingly more and more schools I see are struggling. Like more and more, they're not struggling in that they're going to close.
Right.
But they're struggling in that they're reducing services.
Right, or cutting academic departments.
Correct. Cutting academic departments or, laying off, going to higher ratios between the number of people in different departments that provide the services. And, I think we can't do enough to help people to understand how to sort of interpret some financial data and some tea leaves and look at things like net tuition revenue and enrollment trends. And I've talked, it's hard because, you start getting in and you start talking about 990s and all that stuff, and it starts getting really technical, and you wonder, is it too technical? Are you snoozing the audience?
Right. Oh, no, I think we've got to keep lifting these things up.
I think they're really important because, this, when you talk to people in admissions, like, people are very, very, very concerned of like the financial health of their institutions. And I think that the public would be surprised how many schools that even have pretty low admit rates are doing things that would probably surprise them. I'm not going to name a name, but I'll tell you this off the air. But I had a student this week. This is a school that has an admit rate of under 40%. And the student had appealed for more money, had been told no, and then sent in the response that they were going to go to another school. And immediately the school sent them 11,000 more.
Oh, my goodness.
And I see that kind of stuff out here. And I'm talking about schools that are, on paper at least, denying more kids than they admit. Now, I think what some people might not understand is sometimes because of what we've talked about a lot, there can be schools that on paper look like they have a low admit rate, but they're really figuring out who they think is coming and who's not.
Yes,
absolutely. Or I remember a school I was having a conversation with that has an admit rate of around 40%, but they told me that it's around 85 for domestic applicants.
Oh.
Yeah, it's around 85 for domestic applicants and under 2% for international students.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right, Susan. Well, we're both chatterboxes, but Susan and I are listeners. It's 11 p.m. here on a Tuesday night. Susan and I are chatting.
And we're still talking.
So we'll call it quits. Hope you guys enjoyed this. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Susan.
You're very welcome.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Julia's back, and we've got a great question from Dale from Virginia. We'll play the question and then have a little discussion.
Hi, Mark. This is Dale in Virginia. I have a school-specific question as well as a general question about how schools look at the IB diploma program. So we live in Northern Virginia. My daughter attends a school that offers the IB diploma. We had a really bad experience with the IB program with my older child, and my younger child was not thinking about taking the IB diploma. However, she was told recently at her school that for applicants to the University of Virginia who are applying from schools in Virginia that offer the IB diploma, that they will not be considered competitive if they do not complete the IB program and obtain the IB diploma. So 2 questions for you. First, about UVA specifically, is that an accurate statement of their position on admissions for applicants from IB schools? And second, more generally, are students who attend schools that offer the IB going to be in some way penalized for not taking the most rigorous programs if they don't obtain the full IB diploma? Thank you very much. Always love the podcast, and thank you for all you do.
Julia, you want to start? I have some thoughts on this one. I might talk a little bit more than you on this one, but what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, why don't we start with you in terms of the more specific bit about Virginia and whatnot, and then I'm happy to chime in with, as a reader for 2 universities, sort of how IB versus other curricula are evaluated.
Sounds good. So this is a great question. And I love the question. First of all, let me say this. Colleges really do like that IB program. Like, they like the IB program. They love the rigor. They love the exposure. Like AP is a la carte, right? It's like, take anything off the menu. With the diploma, you're ensured a balanced education. So many different things about it. There's an art aspect. There's a community service aspect to it. And then there's teaching you how to actually think, and then a lot of writing in that. So it is seen as just very impressive curriculum. And when someone has completed the diploma, they like that. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I'm talking about the most selective schools here in the country. So having said that, and I'm going to say this first, Dale, I don't have explicit specific knowledge about UVA, but But I feel quite strongly that I'm correct with what I'm going to say. So you will hear from colleges all the time, especially the most selective ones, that we expect you to take the most rigorous curriculum. And so the language that may be used, that if your school, if that's the IB diploma, then the implication is that's what we would expect. But what I want to say is there are always exceptions. And I'm going to give you an example, and this is, I feel so apropos to what you're talking about. So I did a college fly-in program to the University of Pennsylvania. The fly-in was just for college counselors, Ivy League school. And this question came up in the questions from one of the counselors. Do you need to see the diploma? Or are you okay with a bunch of IB? And the response was, we like the IB diploma here. That was the response. Okay. Now, I will tell you, I worked with a student this year that got in UPenn in regular decision at an IB school that did not have the IB diploma. Now, here's some of the circumstances. The student took every single course for the IB diploma, except they took AP psychology instead of IB psychology. And that's because it was widely regarded and sort of public knowledge within the school's community that the AP psych teacher was just one of the rock star teachers in the school. And then the counselor even communicated that this is a legendary teacher, and the student made this decision just because they felt they'd get the better education. They were not running away from rigor. So that was both communicated from the counselor, and then the student also articulated it. And the student got in and is going to Penn actually in regular admission. And so the reason I bring that up is when schools say we like the IB diploma, what they're really saying is we expect a significant amount of rigor across all disciplines. That does not mean that if a student is able to demonstrate that they have shown that rigor, that there will not be exceptions made. And I would be flabbergasted if that was a hard stop coming from Nova. You don't IB school, you don't have the diploma, you're not getting in. I just think it's proxy for we expect the most demanding curriculum. And I think when there are ways, and a lot of times there will be ways, like my student this year, then they'll be okay with that. What they're really saying is we expect to see rigor and across all areas. Now, that is across all areas. That doesn't mean sometimes a lot of my students think that, well, if I'm, let's say, an engineering student, they think the only thing that really matters is math and maybe science. No. Those schools still want to see rigor in other areas, in the English, in the social sciences, in the foreign language. That's a common misperception that I encounter. It's the only thing that really matters is my subject area of interest. And so I don't have to do rigor over here. No, they're not. They are saying that they want rigor outside of the area that you want to major in. But if your curriculum would be graded as most demanding, and that's a box that school counselors have an opportunity to check when they do the secondary school counselor form, and they're asked to rate the rigor of all of the students. Now, not everybody fills those forms out. I understand that. But if your curriculum would satisfy the most demanding, I feel very, very confident that UVA would do that. They'd be fine with that. I can't say there's too many exceptions for them not to have that amount of rigidity, especially from the University of Virginia, which, from my experience, does one of the better jobs of any public school when it comes to doing a whole person reading of an admissions file. You have people what about a student that transferred in to a new school and their family moved there in the 12th grade? And for those of you who don't know, IB is really an 11th, 12th grade 2-year process. There's just going to be exceptions. There just are. And that's my thoughts on that. But I'm saying this without specific UVA advice, but I feel really strongly similar to what Penn was saying to me and to the rest of the counselors. We like to see the diploma not just a bunch of a la carte IB classes, but then here they go ahead and they take a kid that didn't have the diploma. Those are my thoughts. What do you want to say, Julia?
Completely agree. For both schools I've read for, so I think you're completely right. It really, when they say we like the IB diploma, it is certainly a proxy for we like you to have taken the most demanding or most challenging courses in each area of study as possible for you. And there's not a lot of schools that do offer both an AP curricula and an IB curricula. And certainly this caller their child goes to a really great, high-powered high school. So there are some that do offer both AP and IB. For both colleges I've read for, when I go to assess the rigor of the curriculum, AP is weighed as the same IB. So I record how many IB courses and what they were in. I record how many AP and what they were in. And it's not like AP is seen right below the IB, or that if there isn't a IB diploma awarded, that does not work against the student. But I would caution, maybe not University of Virginia, because I do find, and kudos to them, I don't know how they do it, but I do find them to read very deeply and well into each student, despite the massive amounts of applications they get. But I would say it's very possible there are some large institutions out there that don't have the time or nuance to look into each particular school profile to see what is available and what's not. So with a caveat, I think the vast majority of colleges would look at AP and IB as similar in rigor. But
And can I stop you for a sec? One of the reasons for that is it goes back to schools judging you in the context that you come from.
Right.
And most people are not coming from IB schools. AP is more the norm. It's the same thing even for schools that don't have AP or IB. The same thing, right? They'll judge you in the context that you're coming from. And so, because I've had this conversation before where people almost feel guilty if I don't present it right. Like, oh my goodness, I'm not at IB school. My kid's at a disadvantage. So I'm really glad that you brought that part. And both of them, they know are rigorous. Both of them, they have a long track record of knowing, being that with the other information in the file, being able to make it know who's going to be admissible and who can handle the program, and they can have a high degree of confidence. It's more tricky when you get into stuff like narrative writings and things like that. Takes an extra level of specialized reading training, but they're very comfortable and very familiar with both of them.
Totally. And also, if this is any proof to what Mark and I are saying, is that the student doesn't even know what they're going to score on their IB scores for each of their last area studies. So how could a college, because they won't know what they might have predicted scores, but usually not. So they know you're enrolled in that class, but they won't actually know how you score on your IB diploma when they admit you or not admit you.
Right. There you go. Really good point. And why don't you just talk about predicted scores? It's something I've been wanting to talk about, and we haven't really talked about that much on here in case someone's not following that, Julia.
Sure. And you might hear this in your information sessions if you visit a college where, again, and that's an important point that Mark just made, that it's not super common for a school to be an IB school. But sometimes you'll hear in the information sessions like, oh, a score of a 4 or 5 on an AP, or a 6 or a 7 on a higher level or standard level IB course would earn you credit to whatever college you decide to go to. So the IB diploma, you actually sit for tests in each of those areas of study that you've taken. And there's SL, standard level, and there's HL, higher level. And oftentimes students will have a mix of both levels. And so they will, based on sort of their first year, they will sort of have an understanding of what they might get when they go to sit for their IB diploma. And gosh, it's been a minute, Mark, so you might need to help me with this, but there are certain predicted scores that would be higher, obviously, that are either passable, but also high, that really, it does not, unless I'm out of the loop, it's not really something that U.S. colleges look at. But certainly if you're applying abroad or are coming from abroad. It's a standardized diploma. So those scores could very much determine if you'll be admitted to abroad institutions that do look at the predicted scores or the final scores that you get on your IB diploma.
Yeah, when I'm working with international students that are in IB schools, they have predicted scores. And I think it's because they're usually applying to other schools in other countries and they're just used to giving predictive scores. But there are some schools that will consider that. It's one factor. It's not a non-factor. The more selective the school, the more everything is factored into their assessment. And so it's just something that that is done, because sometimes I'll have conversations with my students of what it looks like their predictive score is going to be, subject by subject, SL, HL. It can get pretty interesting. Anyway, we're getting off on a nuance here on the topic. We probably should do a whole other thing on this, but the bottom line. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, probably doesn't. It probably it's like 2% of our listeners. This might make sense too. Yeah.
I know, but our listeners are super curious about things that they don't know. And that's what I love about them. Even if it doesn't apply to them. Like a lot of times they'll write in and say that about college spotlights. They'll say, my student would never be interested in that, but it's so cool learning about schools I've never heard of before. And it really warms my heart every time I hear that. So Dale, here's what I'll say about this in closing. You as in your student, this is a kind of question that UVA admission officer would love to answer.
Mm-hmm.
You can just go straight to them. You don't have to trust the rumor mill. You can say what you've heard and you can ask, is that absolute black and white or is there any nuance there? And see what your answer is. I'd love for you to do that and report back. That'd be awesome. So thanks, Dale. That was a good one.
Yeah. Sorry, got a little in the weeds there. Got excited.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in our fourth and final part, Michele talks about how the process can be different in the United Kingdom. Holly talks about her book she wrote with Michele called College Unmazed, Design and Document Your Homeschool. And we haven't been having recommended resources in this interview because you're about to get a bunch of them. Holly and Michele share some other great resources in addition to their book. Michele warns us about trusting the rumor mill when it comes to homeschooling. Michele has some words of wisdom on the topic of college readiness, including what students with learning differences need to do. And our guest experts discuss the stereotype, homeschooled students struggle socially. Listen and enjoy.
It is an equity issue. When we're talking about schools, some will have a counselor who only has 20 seniors, and some will have 400 seniors. And to write to know 400 seniors, to write 400 recommendation letters is an huge burden and the top of all of the other things school counselors are doing. So I absolutely understand that the reasoning by some schools not doing it. Also, it's important to know if you're applying outside the US, requirements are different. I had a student I helped apply to UK schools, and the primary application platform there was the UCAS, and it wants one recommendation only, and it specifies not a parent. So in talking to the people who run the UCAS, because as a counselor, I can talk to them and ask questions like this, I said, we've got a homeschool parent. Yes, they've got a primary mentor for the academics who will write it, but there's context that person doesn't always have. And they gave us a way that partly we could have the parent's quotation in there as well, that we can still give the information of the context outside of the standard format. So again, if there is a requirement on the website or from the college that doesn't quite work because it's made for a different system, school system, like Liam said, we can ask and we can be able to convey the special aspects of the kids' experience.
Thank you. Let's talk about resources for homeschool parents. Talk about your book, what somebody would get from your book, what they'd learn, takeaways from your book, as well as other resources besides your book that, whether it's websites or whatever that you want to share with families?
So thanks for the opportunity to tell people a little bit about our book. So Michele and I are writing, diligently putting final touches on our book, which is College Unmazed: Design and Document Your Homeschool. And in that book, we really take parents through a twofold journey. The first half of the book is, how do you homeschool high school? How do you know what's required? How do you decide what to teach? How do you select or design classes? How do you keep records? How do you assign grades? And on it goes. That's the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book is largely what we've discussed here today, those 4 core documents, and how do you present your homeschool in the best possible light to an admissions officer. So we're super proud of it. We love the College Unmazed universe. They have a workbook that's available to all students, not homeschool students. It's for any student in the process. So our book is a companion to the College Unmazed book that is already out there. And we are part of the constellation. There's a dual enrollment book that's been written under the College Unmazed umbrella, and we're just thrilled to be adding the homeschool addition to that. I think some other recommendations I would have after you buy our book is I'm really a data girl. I like data. And one thing that's frustrating about homeschooling and homeschool world is it's hard to come by good data. And a lot of the homeschool research comes from sources with an agenda, sometimes researchers with an agenda. So very often in homeschool families, when they're trying to make the decision to homeschool, I will hear mom say, I am so on board, and my husband is hesitant. I hear that a lot. How can I convince him? So I don't get into the marriage aspects of all that. But one site I like is ICHER.org. It's the International Center for Home Education Research, originally started, I believe, by Robert Kunzman out of Indiana University. I like it because it's got a overall analysis of homeschool, all the homeschool studies that have been done. And they talk about some of the limitations and some of the trends that we can be pretty confident about, and some of the things sometimes we like to brag about that maybe aren't quite supported by the research. So I love that. And then I think the other thing that we came across when we were writing the book that I really loved was just the use of AI and how that can apply to homeschoolers. So one site that I would point home educators to is something called Subject Explorer. And I think it's learningcorner.co that hosts Subject Explorer. But I love it because you can put in the age of your student, you can put in, what subject you want a description for, and then you can just put in all the experiences they had. So sometimes home educators are like, I know they learned. I mean, we've gone to 10 plays this year and we had a robust discussion after every play, but how do I translate that into a course description? Well, you can plug it into Subject Explorer and it's going to give you some nice language. And, at least right now, that's still a free tool. I don't know if it'll be monetized in the future. So that's just a couple for me. And then I know Michele has an entirely different focus of interest and recommendations.
What do you want to add to that, Michele?
I'll add one thing about the book. College Unmazed is to help students walk through the process, students who don't have the support of a consultant or a counselor who can spend a lot of time with them. And so it's workbook style, super friendly. Our book, as part of that universe, is also workbook style in that we're helping parents determine all of the pieces that are going to go into those 4 documents through the first 4 chapters. So we're helping figure out, what do you have to save? Do you need to keep every piece of paper they ever write on? How do you do that? So it would be a real tool for them. There are so many resources out there, and it can be hard to find the ones that really speak to you, that work for your kids. The homeschooling community at large, especially prior to the pandemic, super, super close and friendly, people sharing resources all the time. But what that can mean is you don't always know how accurate that information is for your student. Just like in school, there may be rumor of, oh yeah, that kid got into all the Ivies, or that kid with a 2.5 GPA got a full ride to Harvard. even though their parents make more money than the principal. There can be those rumors that go around. It can happen in the homeschool community too. So what worked for your kid may not work for my kid, and that's okay. So there's tons of information, and I highly recommend talking to other homeschoolers, but be aware that, one size doesn't fit all. So a book, though, that I would love to recommend is called A Place to Belong, and I'll get you the information about it. Amber O'Neill Johnson wrote this, and it talks about how you curate your own home library, because we all share our values with our kid, whether or not we make that explicit in advance, whether or not we really think about it when we choose to homeschool. We are communicating our values in our home. You can communicate just your values, or you can communicate about lots of different values grounded in your home and your home's values. And what Amber talks about is how you can provide books that are both windows and mirrors, so that your child can understand themselves and grow and be inside that trusted, loving home environment, and see through the window to understand other people's experiences. So that's something that I wish that had existed back when my kids were little, and I would recommend it to others.
Thank you. Great. So before we transition to our lightning round, and I'm going to be fast because there's 3 of us in our lightning round, is there anything that we haven't shared about homeschooling that's important that you want to share before we transition? Liam's got something he wants to share. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to just say Holly and Michele are certainly the experts over me on resources specific to homeschooling. But I would just encourage all the students and families out there, right? You've made a bold educational choice for the K through 12 years that reflects your students' individual needs. And I would strongly encourage you to approach the college process in the same way. There are thousands of amazing colleges in this country, many of whom admit the vast majority of their applicants. And many of those colleges are really, really happy to see applications from homeschoolers and are going to ask you to jump through fewer hoops than the colleges that are literally, being forced to choose one out of X number of students to admit. And some of those colleges may well end up being the perfect fit for your student, right? So if you've already spent most of your life blazing your own educational path, there's no reason to stop now. And I will say just one, as since we're talking about fabulous books, this has nothing to do with homeschooling specifically, but I mentioned at the top that Beloit is a member of the organization called Colleges That Change Lives, which is also a fabulous book by Lauren Pope that highlights about 40 colleges all over the country that offer something that I think is really particularly relevant to homeschoolers, which is small, supportive communities and student-centered education that responds to the individual student need, really strong mentorship, ability for students to forge their own educational path. And so if as a homeschooler, you're sitting there going, I have no idea where to begin this college thing. I don't know what kind of school I'm looking for. That would be a great book to flip through and just get a sense for some of the schools that might be a really good fit for you.
Michele?
There's one more topic we didn't talk about, which is not just the college application, but college readiness. Being ready to take college classes, being ready to live in a dorm with others and take those classes, be at the schedule. Some people could think, oh, well, homeschoolers have more to do to get ready. Some homeschoolers have taken college classes starting at 14 or 15. They are ready. So one thing to know, though, is it depends on how much autonomy the kid has had, how much agency, how much choice they've had. Because just like in school, you can tell your kid what they have to do, or you can start scaffolding and enable them to make increasing numbers of choices. When a student is already used to taking a class twice a week for an hour and a half or 2 hours and doing things in between, they're preparing for college. Knowing that you can help your child get ready by letting them take more and more steps toward independence, it's a great thing. And also being aware of what accommodations, what school would call accommodations, that you're providing your child and that they might need in college is also really important. So if your student has learning differences, it's important to consider those, consider getting them documented in advance so that when they walk into college the first day, they've already talked to the Office of Student Support Services. They've already made the connections that they need. Say they need somebody to take notes, or somebody to record the tests or the lectures, or extra time on tests, any of those kinds of things, it's important to get documented. And if they were in school as a typical school student, they should have that documented through a 504 or IEP. Even so, they need extra documents. Homeschoolers may not already have those documents, so they'll still have to make sure they provide the right information.
There is another sort of elephant in the room we haven't addressed, a stereotype about homeschoolers, which is they're smart, but socially, can they adjust? That's a stereotype out there. Do you know that? Do you advise homeschoolers to sort of look for opportunities to showcase that? Like, because people are on teams and there's plenty of ways that homeschoolers can demonstrate that. Is that something that you advise? And I see some head nodding from both Liam and Michele going on over here on that one.
I think in general, we don't have to advise, is what I find. So I would say it is a stereotype. It's an old stereotype. I don't find that I have to advise that. If I see a gap, certainly I'm going to mention it. But I think, most homeschoolers I know are running very busy with their activities, including group activities. But we also know from research that when homeschoolers land on campus, they tend to have a little bit higher GPAs, and they tend to be in more leadership positions in student organizations. So it's great to be aware of the stereotypes, but it's also good to know that the homeschoolers are just fine.
So, Liam, what made you nod your head when I brought it up? You were nodding over there.
I was thinking of advising in the sense of making sure that all of that fabulous stuff is captured in the application, right? Not sitting down with a family in 9th grade and saying, okay, what are you going to do to socialize your, introverted homeschooler, right? But sitting down with a family in 11th and 12th grade and saying, okay, it's not just the transcript, it's not just the essay. This student has done all of these amazing things in their community, with their friends, with other adults, etc. Let's make sure all of that stuff is captured, so that there's not a chance that an admissions officer can have that stereotype come into mind.
Well said.
Right. Let's make sure that that's all well documented.
Great. So you guys get it easy. Normally, first-time guests get multiple hot seat questions, but when there's 3 of you, I'm only going to give you guys one, which is how do you relax? How do you unwind? Any hobbies? How do you relieve stress when you're not doing educational consulting or admissions?
I play Stardew Valley. It's a game I love on my iPad, and I've played it with homeschooled students and friends. So,
is it bad that I don't know what Stardew Valley is? Is that bad?
Oh, it's a video game.
Okay.
Animal
Crossing. It's dangerous when you start.
Yeah.
Holly, Liam, what about you?
Well, first of all, can I just say that I love that the PhD from MIT is doing video games, like plus one for Michele for breaking stereotypes. Like, you go, girl. For me, what do I do to relax? I eat a lot of dark chocolate. I go on a lot of walks, and I read more than I probably should to be in touch with celebrity gossip.
Hey, we all need to have our diversions. Liam, what about you?
Yeah, I think sort of all of the above. I'm a reader and a musician. Big mystery novel kick right now, but decent amount of video games in there. It's one of the biggest challenges of admissions work is that during application reading season, I read all day, and at the end of reading, I really want to just read a good book, and I just can't. I have to do something that's not reading. So my reading suffers in the winter months.
Hey, honest confession. Well, listen, this has been awesome. I really appreciate all of you, your time, your generosity, your expertise. If somebody wants to reach out and contact you, are you comfortable sharing how they could do that?
Absolutely. I'm Michele at evardconsulting.com. So you can look up Evard, EVARD consulting.com.
And I am at thoughtfulhomeschooling.com, and my email is thoughtfulhomeschooling@gmail.com.
You can find me on the Beloit website. That's beloit.edu. And my email is my last name, Dailey, Dailey, first initial L, so Daileyl at Beloit.edu. I'm always happy to hear from homeschooled families.
And I'll make a point to put this in the show notes in case someone's driving and they didn't capture that, but they can go to the show notes and get that. So just want to thank you all for being so generous to give us 90 minutes of your time. I really, really, really like this. Quick question, Liam. How long have you been at Beloit?
I think just about 4 years at Beloit now.
Good for you. Awesome. I'll talk to you off air about Beloit.
And now you see why we asked him. You see why we asked him to do this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You picked a great choice. No, I was just going to say we would love to have Beloit on to do a deeper dive of Beloit on our podcast. So we do deep dives on colleges and interview thought leaders. So you and I can talk off air, whether that be you or whether the bosses that be want to handle that. But but it's been on our radar. It's been on our radar as a school we'd love to have. So, but thanks again.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
Friends, if you missed part 1 of Kevin Newton's spotlight on LSE, the London School of Economics, strongly encourage you to go back and check out part 1. But we'll now transition to part 2 of 3. Okay, you know what, Kevin? I don't remember us talking very much about personal statements here. Why don't you go into a little more detail on what the personal statement is and how, if any, it's different from... I know you don't do U.S. admissions, but I'm sure you're familiar with the 650-word personal statement in the Common App that goes to pretty much, the 1,100 schools that take the Common App. Talk about the differences between them.
This year, actually, UCAS is starting something new where they're breaking the personal statement up into a series of short answer questions. So to the non-specialists like me, it reminds me a little bit more of the UC approach. Mm-hmm. So they're asking very specifically what they want. And honestly, it's the same questions that, I've been asking. If I could pat myself on the back here a little bit, it's the same questions that, we've always been asking our students to write about, which is, why do you want to study this? Why do you feel prepared for this? Why do you want to, what do you want to do afterwards? Have you faced any special difficulties in preparing for this? At no point do we care overseas, especially LSE, about any kind of family struggles, personal struggles, any kind of identity issues. It's not that those things aren't important. It's just at the end of the day, and I have to thread this needle carefully here, Mark, so help me out here.
I'll do my best.
Overseas universities, especially UK universities, and probably at the top of that heap, LSE, does not do holistic admissions at all. It is, we want to find the most qualified people that want to come here in this subject, and those are the people we want to accept.
And just so you know, people that do holistic admissions would say we're looking for the most qualified people as well. They would just say that we use a whole person approach to evaluating what the most qualified person is. And we also look at what our needs as an institution are and how you might bring a voice or perspective that maybe is not being brought by many other people to strengthen the educational experience of everybody. So I just have to kind of be an advocate for U.S. holistic admissions. I think they would also say we're looking for the most qualified people. It's just, how are you defining it?
And to be fair, the UK universities feel they get those needs met through domestic admissions.
Sure.
Every UK university has a great deal of accessibility where they have one thing in particular they do is if you come from a disadvantaged postal code, you have a lower set of admissions requirements because they want to encourage applications from those people.
So they're doing some components of whole person evaluation, but that's more for domestic.
Right. So
the process is a little different for international versus domestic.
If you've got a Nobel Prize by the time you're 18, then, Malala, and as we all know, went to Oxford. I don't know where Greta went or is going, but if you've pulled off something like that, then sure. But otherwise, they want to see just the pure academics for their international students.
Good that you made that distinction. So back to this writing. because you referenced the UC app, so let's talk about the UC app. UC app's got the PIQs, and you have 8 of them. You have to pick 4 out of 8, and they're 350 words, and you get choice. Is there choice with the new writing options, or these are the 3 questions? Answer them, and like how many words? Tell me, what's the word count? I mean, what are people looking at?
So you've got a character count of 4,000, which oddly enough comes out to around 650, 700 words. And it's one of those things where some of the questions, they're still getting guidance on exactly how the new application or the new personal statements are going to work. It's, if nothing else, 2024 is the year of guidance from British universities. We're still pulling our hair out about what happened last year with Oxford admissions. So it's everyone has said, wait for the guidance. But in theory, the questions are optional. However, Mark, I think you'd agree, whenever you see optional on a college application, you get to scoff and go, haha, not for me, it's not.
Sure.
Obviously, there's some exceptions. If you've not had anything that's impacted you, that's been to the detriment of your studies, just be honest. Say that I feel confident that I put forward the best version of myself or something like that, or just a simple N/A. But when it comes to those more substantive questions, they're trying to get to know you as an applicant about, why do you want to do this? What do you want to do afterwards? Where do you see yourself? What do you wish you could have done more to prepare yourself? Those are the sorts of things that you want to spend some time on. And you want to write as directly as possible. The STEM kids I work with have a lot easier time of this than the humanities kids, because there is absolutely no room for flowery language. You're trying to pack as much information in, but still make it readable and digestible, because your reader is reading, dozens, if not hundreds of these things a day. You want to stick out, but at the same time, you don't want the reader to get lost if they're having a bad day, they don't feel well, if you've tried to take a gamble by having a little bit more flowery language. The absolute last thing you want to do is try to incorporate your sense of humor. Every year I've had students try to do it, and every year I've argued with them about it, because
you're not funny over there.
I mean,
they're playing games.
There's a time and a place for it, and they you never know what kind of day the person reading your application is having.
So I'm still not clear. So you've got this 4,000 character, which is that's around 800 words. It's long, depending on the word count. But I got this sense before that it's multiple things. So is that one piece of writing, or is that all of the sub questions combined all are supposed to go into this 4,000 character one piece of writing?
It's among the different question fields, you have a total of 4,000 characters.
Okay. I get it.
And if you don't mind a really terrible segue, including that 4,000 characters is when you would bring up any relevant extracurriculars. So if you are an internationally known pickleball player, they don't care.
Right.
But if you've started a economics club at your school and you have 5 members, but you've been engaged and it's been something you've been doing, that's going to stand out to LSE. If you've went off and read, if you're applying for politics or political philosophy or something like that, if you've read some of the seminal works of political philosophy, or even some of the ones that are, the best piece of advice I can give to anyone applying to LSE, regardless of what they want to study there, is get a subscription to The Economist. Because everyone's going to read it. Your professors are probably going to be quoted in it. And it shows your interest if you can read that. Now, you don't have to read it cover to cover. Like that's a miserable exercise every week. But read the leaders, read the obituary, because the obituary is always interesting. And then just read the sections that are of interest to you so that you can talk about your personal statement. This stood out in an Economist article I read once, because it's showing that you can talk the talk and walk the walk.
So very similar to other European and even Canadian schools, in that so much of the evaluation is around convince me that you are serious about the field that you tell me you want to study.
Exactly. And if all of this is sounding a little overwhelming, because it's a lot, but you still want that LSE experience because it's one of the best educational courses in the world. I said I'd sneak this back in here, Mark. It's, even if you're thinking, you know what, I just want to go to an American university for my degree, if you're thinking of something like medical school, but you're thinking, I want to do some business or something like that, your junior year, you can do the LSE general course, which it's almost a qualification in its own right. It's a year-long study abroad. You take all of your classes along LSE students, and for that year, it's not just a special study abroad like you would find at some other universities. You're in it. You are exposed to everything. And it's by far one of the most competitive study abroad options out there. But I really think that if you're, let's say that you're wanting to go someplace, and I'm going to flex my American college muscles here, Mark. It's going to be scary.
I'll slap you down if I need to.
But especially if you're going someplace like Arizona State or Indiana, which have solid business options, but you want something a little more international, because Phoenix and I think IU's in Bloomington. I've been there. I should know that. If you want something a little more international, you can do this program, the general course. You get a lot of the benefits of being an LSE alum, and it does help your resume stand out internationally. And, again, it's like going back to our very first conversation, Mark, even before we were on the podcast together, it's not for everyone. But I think that, if you're sitting here thinking, well, I'd love to do a study abroad, LSE does not do the traditional semester study abroad. This is the only option they've got. But I think that it's one of the best and just generally most comprehensive study abroad options available.
I'm going to break all the rules in question asking 3 questions at once.
Okay.
I just realized we haven't even asked like around how big is the school in terms of like size, number of students. How large are the classes would be the second question. And obviously we've talked about sort of economics and political science, government, any other areas that you just think, wow, they're just really exceptionally strong and for people interested in this field of study. So all question asking rules got broken there. You're not supposed to ask 2 and I asked you 3.
All right. So size of the school first. Let me pull up the exact number because it's actually pretty small for a British university. There are 13,000 students total, a little under half of whom are undergrads. So you're going to feel a smaller core group of people you're moving through all of this with. Most of the students are graduate students. I think it's 5,000 something undergrads to 7,000 something grad students. And a lot of those are going to be, like Dave's daughter, on the year master's degree course because it's such a good course. As for what LSE is known for, obviously economics, obviously anything politics. They've honestly just, I think of them as kind of like the ultimate proxy for a place like Wharton Business School. Anything business, anything associated with that, where they struggle. And I use the word struggle very lightly here because LSE struggling is, it's like playing LeBron James one-on-one on LeBron.
Boy, that does not sound fun.
It's he may feel he's struggling, but the rest of us are things more area studies based. So if you want to do business of, say, East Asia or the Middle East, you can certainly focus on those. You can certainly, but you're not going to get the same exposure to the culture, to the history, to anything else. You're largely just going to get some classes on the economic and political structure and the language. So, which does get into a little bit of the philosophical mindset of LSE. LSE has some pretty strong connections to the British Conservative Party. So, for students who, do, as I know on your infamous 160 something questionnaire, Mark.
170, but it's counting. 120 for students, 50 for parents.
Oh, okay. Well, 170. One of the things you ask about is, where do you feel most comfortable politically? And LSE has that reputation of being quite conservative on the British spectrum. How that matches up on the American spectrum is a question that's beyond my pay grade. And I do not like to alienate people.
Sure.
So,
well, all I know is Lauren's pretty progressive, so it couldn't be that bad, or I think it might have, and they would have probably looked other places.
My friend who I mentioned, his politics definitely fall on the left as well. And he loved it. But then again, it's not going to be the kind of place where you're readily attacked openly, but just be aware that, your professors are going to be advisors for the Conservative Party in a lot of cases. But, weird things happen. I mean, I went to SOAS, and one of my professors, who I thought was all about European harmony and everything else, turned out he's currently an MEP for Alternatives for Deutschland, the very hard right party in Germany. And
never know.
It's just kind of like, that's a shocker.
Now, the third question was class size.
So you're going to see some variation. It's not going to be like Oxford and Cambridge with the one-on-one tutorials
Sure.
or one-on-three tutorials. It is still going to be largely lecture-based, at least for the introduction subjects, but they do move towards seminar style because it's part of LSE is that, they readily understand that in a few very short years, you're going to be on the BBC or Sky News or whoever getting grilled. So they really want to make sure you can hold up your beliefs and your thoughts. So it does move towards that, but for an introduction to economics class, which it seems ridiculous to say that LSE is going to teach introduction to economics, because pretty sure they're teaching macro and micro on like day 4 and 5, and then blasting past that. They're going to be larger classes.
Friends, this concludes the second part of what is a 3-part interview. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'll have another speak pipe question, which I'll pick at the time to see if I can line up with what's going on in society. And then we'll have part 2 of my friend John Hoffman, 45 years in education, just bequeathing some pearls of wisdom on us. And friends, if you're a regular listener of our podcast, I'm closing with a quote you've heard from me before. It comes from Martin Walsh, a former admission dean at Stanford University. And he simply says this: I mean, the most common test we had at Stanford was not how smart are they and what have they invented, but it was actually, would you want to share a dorm with this person for a year? See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, And we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.